So it is my pleasure to welcome onto Paranormal Blip Omega Point, also known as Daniel Elizondo. Hello, Daniel. How are you?
I'm doing great, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm really brilliant, and I've been really looking forward to this. So let's get going. So you are. Let me just introduce you to the kind of audience, the listeners. You are one of the co-writers, one of the kind of two main writers and researchers of this PDF that came out a couple of months ago called Loose Threads. Now, Loose Threads is, I've been talking about it on the podcast, and it's created waves in the kind of UFO community. And first of all, maybe this is a good place to start, actually, Daniel. Um, what is Loose Threads?
That's a that's a great question. I think that loose threads started out as just sort of just a couple of connections, right? That I was chatting with my co-author, who is known as the Hermetic Penetrator. So I call him Hermes,
Uh-huh.
just to shorten it. Just kind of dialoguing back and forth about, hey, have you noticed that this thing connects to this thing and that thing connects to that thing? And it really was, I think, precipitated by a couple of things. It was precipitated by um, the interview that came out with James Oak Shannon, who is kind of important for a couple of reasons, by Jay for Project Unity.
Uh-huh.
It was also precipitated by the release of his notes, by Oak Shannon's notes from the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group meetings in 1985. And so those things coming out basically started a dialogue between Hermes and I, where we were starting to kind of ping pong back and forth and kind of almost like one upping each other. Like, hey, did you see this? Oh, but did you notice that? And just and it got to a point where we just said, hey, why don't we do something together? Because I was already writing and blogging, and he was writing and blogging, and it seemed like we had kind of a shared interest in this, and so that's kind of what it turned into. It turned into this collaborative effort, and what we found was that in investigating those connections between Oak Shannon's notes from the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group meetings in 1985 and the Wilson Davis document, which has been talked about at length and written about at length prior to
Mhm.
what we've done, um, that we were basically zeroing in on a group of people. Um, these people are scientists, they're intelligence community officials, they are members of the military industrial complex. We were basically zeroing in on this group of people that basically constituted a movement. And this movement continues to today. And so there are a lot of things that are going on right now, up to and including, I would argue, even Arrow and things that are happening with that, that would not have happened had it not been for this movement. And so
Mhm.
we're basically zeroing in on this group of people and how they connect, how they relate to each other, statements they've made, things that they've published. And we really tried to let the sources speak. And it does sort of paint a picture of sort of this journey, right? Of these guys to basically try and find their way to the middle of these ultra secret UFO reverse engineering programs. And so that's what it really turned into. That's not what we set out to do. That's just what happened. That these same people started popping up over and over and over again. Um, and we really did our best to try and stay away from rumor, and really stick with what is it that they themselves have said. Whether or not we can take that at face value with is one thing, but let's at least put their statements together, and go from there. And so it was definitely it felt like it was writing itself, right? Like it after a while, like we were just along for the ride, discovering all of these things.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's how you get what loose threads is very wide, but it does have a narrative. But it's not a narrative that myself or Hermes came up with. It's a narrative that is just kind of woven into the statements and the things that people have said and things that people have done and published and over history. We're basically looking at a really important part of this sort of denied history. And so I think it serves as a really nice primer for folks who want to learn more about where we are today in the UFO mystery and how we got here, and even what are the things that are being studied and being looked at in the background, and getting familiar with those things, because a lot of the things that they were looking at in 1985, it turns out that they are looking at now, right, or at least very recently. So,
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. That's why it's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, absolutely. But and also this is obviously the PDF is linked in the episode description of this episode, and it actually links to your medium, and then through that with your kind of introduction, Daniel. So key to this then, this group of people, the Advanced Theoretical Physics Group, there's a couple of names in there that crop up time and time again. Hal Puthoff, John Alexander, Kit Green is in there. A couple of people that kind of move around from group to group almost. And yeah, like you say, there are connections to these other groups, like OSAP and then, ATIP and all of that later on. So that's the beginnings of that group are quite interesting. There was the fellow from Skunk Works, the fellow who's that? Well, I've totally forgotten his name now. What was that?
Ron Blackburn.
Name? That's it,
yeah.
Blackburn. So was it was him and John Alexander, is that right? They were the kind of Yep. And then do you want to talk a little bit? Now I know that you've kind of spoken about this in other interviews. And by the way, I was saying to you just a minute ago that I've been listening to you all day because I listened to your amazing breakdown of this in with Richard Dolan, which I will link, and I think that people need to check that out if they haven't done. And not to kind of do the same thing again, but just to give my audience a bit of a kind of smidgen of info about who this group were, kind of where they came from, who they were, and what they were aiming to do.
Absolutely. So it really all starts with the Army, and specifically INSCOM. Colonel John Alexander finds himself as what he terms a freelance colonel. He, for a variety of reasons, some of which is just his personal interest, but he finds himself connected with something called Task Force Delta. And Task Force Delta is basically described as a forward-looking think tank that is trying to find ways to give the Army an edge, right? To make sure that they stay up to date, both with in comparison to the other branches, but also with regard to the enemy as well. And so they are looking for outside the box, and not even just outside the box. I think he said at one point that it was so outside the box that they didn't even know that the box existed. And so he meets Colonel Alexander meets through Task Force Delta, a few people, and one of those people is General Albert Stubblebine, who appears quite a bit, and some of your listeners may be familiar with him due to his work with the remote viewing program. But he also meets Ron Blackburn, and Ron Blackburn is an engineer at Lockheed Skunk Works. I think he's even a senior engineer there, and they basically get together and find that they have a lot in common, right? That they have this shared conviction that there are hidden UFO reverse engineering projects, right, somewhere, and perhaps even a little bit of incredulity that they have not been included on that. Especially, I could see that from Ron Blackburn's standpoint, working for Lockheed Skunk Works, and so they start to they decide that they want to try and get to the bottom of this. They want to try and get to the center of what becomes known as sort of like the secret onion, right? Because of the layers of secrecy.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to figure out how to get in, and so it's with that in mind that they decide maybe we need to build a working group, right? We need to bring together people who either have knowledge of the programs or might be able to help us to make headway to get access to those programs, right? They're trying to create a need to know, a center of gravity, if you will. And they figure that if they can get enough of these people in the room and they can, get enough knowledge in the room on that topic, on that subject, maybe they will be able to either discover it or they will be able to actually get access to it, right? That they'll be able to get read in and get the answers that they, are desperately seeking. And so at one point, they literally go to early on a skiff at Lockheed Skunk Works and they basically have a list of names, and they compare this list of names, Colonel Alexander and Dr. Blackburn, just sort of talking about here's who I want to include, here's who I want to include and why. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how it's born. The first meeting, we believe, happens in 1985 at a skiff at a place called BDM, Braddock, Dunn, and McDonald. This is a defense contractor who, at that point, General Albert Stubblebine, who was really connected with John Alexander. John Alexander reported to Stubblebine. He was Stubblebine's action officer. Stubblebine was forced into an early retirement, and he goes to work straight to BDM. And so that's where the first few meetings happen. And it seems that the majority of the meetings ended up happening there at BDM in 1985. And so that's sort of what they were doing as a group, the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group. The amount of times they met is sort of, I don't think there's a true answer, honestly, because there was sort of this official group, but then over the years, it kind of dwindled. They added new members, people left, and then it becomes less of a, hey, we're meeting in a skiff, and more like, hey, we're going to go and have dinner at Colonel John Alexander's house, right? Or we're going to go and meet at this restaurant and talk about this. And it becomes, I think, a little bit more fractured, where you have pockets of people that are talking and about this other pocket of people.
Yeah.
And so it just evolves, right, as relationships do. And that's what sort of leads to some of these ongoing relationships that lead to where we are modern day. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the audience, a skiff is is basically a secure space where people can meet, knowing that they're not going to be monitored or recorded in any way. There's kind of like security built into the structure of the building or the room within a building. So that's what a skiff is. SCIF, yeah. Which is, do you know off the top of your head what that stands for? I can't remember.
Oh, I'm sure
secure,
it's like
controlled,
secure,
something.
Controlled.
Ice cream, I think, is the
sensitive,
ice cream.
compartmented information facility.
God, you're good.
Yeah,
you're good. Okay, yeah. So that's the skiff. So, what one thing that I was really interested in when I heard about this, and when I started reading about it, because I think I actually heard the Dole interview before I had definitely before I'd finished it, the Loose Threads. But remote viewing, okay, I spoke a couple of months ago, I think it was in December, to Daz Smith, who's this British-based remote viewer. And I know that you know this, but I'm kind of talking to my audience here, who probably do know. I mean, you probably heard the episode, audience. But anyway, he's a British-based remote viewer. He's a kind of archivist and kind of historian of remote viewing as well, okay? And he's got a real interest in UFOs, like a big time interest, and kind of follows UAP news and UFOs and blah blah blah. So, and I asked him about some of his tasks that he's been given over the years in terms of remote viewing different cases as an example, and it's very interesting. But he said at one point, because of course we've got this situation whereby there's an understanding that craft, and we'll go on to talk about, baiting and capturing craft in a moment, but
Mm-hmm.
craft, it's very difficult to find out how you can fly these things, okay? And one of the ideas is that you need to have a kind of symbiotic relationship with it. So a kind of non-human intelligence pilot would have some kind of relationship that can't be kind of duplicated by some, technician or whatever. And Daz says, or like a joke in the interview, they should get some remote viewers to try to fly you know, their craft.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, of course, remote viewers, we find out through loose threads, have got a like integral part of the UAP story, and like where we're at with understanding. Well, not me, but where we think people are at with understanding UAPs. And I'm just going to read out uh, a little bit of my notes here, because something that really interested me was this. Uh, one of the people in Loose Threads, you talk about SciTech, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the guy that runs SciTech, says that he's got this bank of remote viewers who are, kind of technically skilled and can understand machinery and how machinery works. And so they remote view craft. And he said this fascinating thing whereby he said basically a way of reverse engineering it is to go back and follow the craft back through time to the point where the construction of the craft makes sense to them. Yeah. So the like, you kind of come across this thing, it's extraordinary. We can talk about is it Weygand who talks about the kind of the organic nature of the craft in the Stephen
Mm-hmm.
Greer testimony, which is fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
that you link that I watched today, which is absolutely
Mm-hmm.
extraordinary stuff, that isn't it? So this, you kind of you come across this craft, you're thinking, what the heck is going on here? It's like indescribable. Weygand described it as a work of art. He described it as organic. This indescribable, although he has described it, but like inconceivable thing in front of you, and uh, and it, you know, how do you get to manufacture something like this? Well, the RVs had this question, and what the RVs did, the remote viewers did, was they kind of went back through time, through our remote viewing, obviously, to a
Mm-hmm.
point where they could understand the kind of the physics of it or the mechanics of it. Am I right in saying that that's basically in Loose Threads?
Yeah, yeah, and really the SciTech guys. You're talking about Major Ed Dames, who
Yeah.
was a member of the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group. On his board, really, kind of the person who was Major Albert Stubblevine. And so there were two transcripts that we found from, I think it was in 1992, both of them, from conferences where General Albert Stubblevine and Ed Dames had presented on remote viewing. And specifically, there were sections where they had a whole. I think Dames gave a whole separate. I think he actually gave two lectures, and one of them was specifically about remote viewing UFOs. Now, this is really extraordinary because the remote viewing program was not declassified until 1995. Excuse me. So they are literally talking about technical, stuff that they're not supposed to be talking about at this public conference. That is a conference for experiencers, and for people who experience anomalous phenomena.
Mhm.
And so yes, they SciTech claims, right? Ed Dames claimed that they found a UFO site, that they found an area, and we believe that the area is probably near the Trinity site, the Trinity test site. which
Yeah.
is it's across the way from that range, and it's also proximate to Kirtland as well. And so there's a lot of stuff in that area, as well as I mean, if you pull up a map and go on, I included it in loose threads, but you can see there are a lot of famous UFO cases, landing cases even, that are really centralized in that area. And so they used remote viewing to identify this area. And then they would go and they would try and view craft there in Jacques Vallée's journals. He talks about being taken to these UFO sites. So it does seem like something that was corroborated. It wasn't just something that Ed Dames said. I don't know that outside of Dames, we don't have anyone saying that they that this site was that they were seeing stuff all the time there or anything like that. But we at least know that it's true that they were finding this, and they were taking people up in jeeps to go to this site and trying to remote view any craft that were there. And obviously, you don't have to go to the site to remote view a craft. It's remote viewing, right? You could be sitting at the kitchen table at John Alexander's house, right, talking about this site and remote viewing it. And so yeah, it's not. There's some information that even if you had the craft sitting in front of you, as you alluded to, that you just can't get, right? You can't necessarily determine the origin. You can't necessarily. You can maybe try and get some, very vague information about, well, it doesn't seem like it's human, right? Or it doesn't seem like it's from any sort of human civilization that we're aware of, right? But there's just some stuff that you can't get. However, if you're able to remote view one of these craft while it's in operation, right? While it's actually traversing that space that they're watching, then maybe you can get some really interesting information, right? Even if you had an intact craft, you're going to get some really cool information that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And like you said, these are technical remote viewers. These are guys that are have engineering backgrounds. They work in aviation, and so they're able to, and so does the person who's a monitor or the tasker. They're talking them through it. Tell me, what direction does the plasma flow? What kind of gate is this that you're seeing? And so there, it's something that even if you and I were really great and gifted remote viewers, I wouldn't know what the heck I was looking at. Whereas if I had an engineering, really strong engineering background or something like that, I might be able to provide some information that was potentially useful. Now, one thing that I do think that's interesting is that Ron Blackburn, who we talked about previously, has spoken about the fact that he has filed patents. I believe he's been awarded 2 patents. And there are pictures in the patent, and we included these in loose threads, that show disc-shaped craft. And he claims that he did this by seeing videos of craft, that he was able to basically figure out how these, really honestly pretty exotic technologies that still aren't mainstream to this day work, by just looking at videos of craft. That he was shown videos, and based on the videos that he was shown, I guess in a classified setting, that he was able to do this. I kind of suggested that seems a little far-fetched to me. and so which I think is kind of funny, because I think that it's possible if they were remote viewing craft and you really needed technical information about the internal workings and mechanisms of the craft, it doesn't seem like a video really gets you there. And so that he's someone to watch. He's still around, and he's given some interesting interviews over the years. But it is interesting. He is a lesser known name in the community, even though he was very prominent, in the formation of the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, which most people in the UFO community now are well aware of.
Yeah. One of the questions I had for you later on, but it might be worth kind of flagging it up at the moment, is this question of, in the last couple of months since Loose Threads was released, are there any things that you feel like you want people to focus on a bit more, like researchers, UFO researchers, to kind of like get their sleeves rolled up and start digging around, because there's so much in Loose Threads. But I think you've just mentioned one of them right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things, and you know, we were talking off air about you know, Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science Volume 5 just came out,
Yeah.
and I haven't gotten my hands on it yet. My co-author Hermes, he has been tweeting the Hermetic Penetrator. He's been tweeting just a massive thread because he got his in. Yeah, I guess he got special treatment somehow and got got his book earlier before anyone else. And so he has been doing just a tweet thread storm, and it really does feel like a lot of the things that we were kind of nibbling around the edges of, or the things that we were hinting at or suspecting. It just seems like Forbidden Science Volume 5 really brings that together and fills in a lot of the gaps. And so I say this with a touch of hubris. I do think that Loose Threads serves as almost a prequel, right, or a primer for someone who you know, is wanting to read that, because they're going to. I'm seeing other people are starting to get their books. It's becoming a big thing where everyone's, you know, posting about, oh my gosh, did you see this and this and this? And if you're looking at that and you're like, I have no idea what any of that is about,
Yeah.
Loose Threads is free, and it's something that will get you up to speed on a lot of these people and a lot of the things that were mentioned. In particular, there are some things that, you know, we were kind of patting ourselves on the back about in choosing to include were statements about General John Sheehan, who was a general in the Marine Corps, who basically had some sort of program running underneath him. And not only that, he was also apparently the person who is referenced in the Wilson Davis notes as having found the programs before, that Admiral Wilson relates to Dr. Eric Davis in their conversation, that you know, that when he talked to these corporate types, right, these three you know, corporate people,
Yeah.
when he actually found the reverse engineering program, that they said that they had been discovered once before, and it caused a big issue, and that's really why they wanted to talk to him, to find out how the heck he, you know, he found them. They were just trying to
Mhm.
rectify the security issue, and apparently the person who found them was General John Sheehan.
Mhm.
And so we had that in Loose Threads, and really we have to give credit to that, to Grant Cameron, because Grant Cameron wrote about this in wrote about General John Sheehan and Bobby Ray Inman, who we talked about, you know, extensively in Loose Threads.
Mhm.
Um, he wrote about that in his book Managing Magic, and that was really curious to me because we knew that Grant Cameron had Oak Shannon's notes, which is where that you know, at the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group meeting, they're talking about a reverse engineering program underneath um, Bobby Ray Inman, but there's no mention anywhere in the notes of John Sheehan, of that. And so we were like, well, where is he getting this information from? And we better put it in there. We really know where it comes from. And yes, we found, you know, there's a picture in there of Colonel John Alexander and General Sheehan as well. And so I thought that was interesting. And so we made the decision to include that, and I'm glad we did,
Mm.
because it seems that there was even more smoke from Sheehan than there was from Bobby Ray Inman. And so I think really digging into who he is, and
Mhm.
and really looking again, the Wilson Davis notes, right? We just, things keep on going back to that,
Mm.
and it seems like even especially reading around the edges is where some of the most interesting information comes out. Where you know, we talked about there being 4 separate programs that came out. They talked about that Bernard Heisch, who is a physicist who had worked with Dr. Hal Puthoff. He was in this group, kind of in and out of this. I wouldn't call him a member of the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, but certainly within the sphere of influence of people who were there in later years. And you know, he says, hey, there are these 4 separate but related UFO programs dealing with, you know, all sorts of things. And then you also, we put out an email that was included in a book from Commander Will Miller, who is talking about 4 programs. And the lists are different, right? The lists that they give
Yeah.
are different, but sort of similar. And then in the Wilson Davis notes, you actually have where he says that he actually found 3 other programs that weren't this program, and they pointed him to this program. And now just recently we're finding out that we're getting confirmation from Valet that all 4 programs were UFO programs. And so this number of 4, I know that's a very convoluted way to say, we have like three different sources basically saying that, hey, you've got 4 related but separate UFO programs. And I believe also Jeremy Corbell has talked about that as well. And I don't know if his source is different from the ones we've discussed, but yeah, I mean, there's just so much. I mean, there's a lot of meat left on the bone for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and that's the way, and that's what's so fun about doing this kind of research is you think you're uncovering it all, and then you find out, oh man, I'm only on the tip of the iceberg. There's still much more to find.
Yeah. Just as a slight aside, I don't know what you think of this, Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with Valet's journals, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
do you think he has to go through some kind of clearance, like security clearance, before they're published? I know,
I don't.
it's just your opinion, but
Yeah, I don't think so. Um, it does not seem unless he is under unless he has personally been put under an NDA. I don't think that him relaying what people told him in private conversations is an issue. It might be an issue for them, but if he's not
not a
under
national
an NDA saying,
security
right,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, if he hasn't signed his life away to say, I will never talk about this program that was allegedly found by Admiral Wilson and before him General John Sheehan, and if he's not going to get in trouble for that,
yeah,
or rather if he hasn't agreed to not talk about that, and even Dr. Eric Davis, if he was not officially read into that program, I think a lot of it is about, coordinating. I'm sure that he let people, I would think that he probably let, they're still close friends, I gather, all of these people.
yeah,
I'm sure that he let them know, hey, by the way, I know you've been not talking and giving no comments on this. I'm planning on releasing this and it's going to talk about this. Um, and, I think from what I understand, the only reason Dr. Eric Davis has not really just openly, completely spilled the beans explicitly on the reality of that meeting is because he's still working, and he's working for, I think the Aerospace Corporation, I think now, and they've told him that he can't talk about this kind of stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's not I don't think it's an NDA thing for him. It's just a, hey, I have to I got to
Uh,
put food on the table, keep a roof over
Totally,
my
yeah,
head, and
totally, totally.
and
Well,
so
that
anyway.
remarkable interview that he gave to Alexandra Rojas a while ago.
Yeah,
I mean, that's that is like
in
peak.
2019.
Oh, it's unbelievable, isn't it? It's so
Yeah,
outstanding, and you quote it in these threads a little bit of it.
yeah,
Um,
liberally. It was
yeah,
hard to figure out what not to put. I was like, can
I
we
know,
just?
I know.
I was like, Hermes, can I just copy and paste this whole thing? He was like, no, we can't just copy and paste the whole thing because it's so much. It's
It's
so much,
unbelievable, isn't it? It's absolutely
and of
extraordinary.
course, it was the same month, I believe, that Omni Talk Radio, Giuliano, Marinkovic, that I think it was that same month that he got his copy of the Wilson Davis notes.
Uh,
And so, Eric Davis was speaking about it, basically, I mean, explicitly speaking about it, without giving any names or anything like that.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's definitely a really, really interesting interview. And we included, I don't think most of it, but a lot of it. So if anybody has not gone back and actually listened to that interview, I encourage you to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put a link to it in the episode description. Um, so one other area that I just mentioned a moment ago is this question of baiting
Mm-hmm.
UAPs, and also maybe we could kind of fold in a few thoughts about capturing UAPs and also attracting them as well. So, for instance, well, we've got this extraordinary story of the Peru case, Hagant. Essentially, the story there was that there was this guy who, and now you link to an interview that he gave, or kind of testimony, if you like, that he
Mm-hmm.
gave to Stephen Greer, yeah.
Mhm.
and that is such a remarkable um video. I just watched it earlier today. It's absolutely brilliant. It's only 30 minutes long, but essentially this guy, he was working for the I mean, I don't know why I'm telling this and not you, but you probably know it much better than me. Do you want to just quickly lay out the kind of parameters of the
Sure.
Rue case, please?
Sure. Yeah. So this is Lance Corporal, I believe, at the time, Jonathan Wygant, and he is working for oh shoot, I'm gonna have to search up his detachment, what he was. Hold on, but this is in Peru. It's in 1997,
Yeah,
and he basically was working um, as let's see. So the really interesting thing about him is that he gives a lot of names, right? Not just of him, but also of the people um, that he was working he was working with. So he was working on Laser Strike. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. Which is basically, I think it had to do with like drug enforcement kind of stuff, where they're
yeah,
trying to make sure that to stop like cartels and all that sort of stuff. And basically there was he gets his crew basically gets called in like, hey, you've got to go, there's been some kind of a crash or whatever. And so they all get into their helicopter and they go, right. And they have to do a hike up a mountain, and they get to this site, this crash site, and he describes that it looks like basically a laser beam is just cut through the woods. And now there's this tear shaped craft that is like lodged into the side of this cliff face. And he talks about that it looks like there's some sort of damage to the rear of it. He actually draws a picture of it,
mm,
and, almost like there was something kinetic that hit it, that it wasn't just a crash, if you will. And so they're actually like going up to the craft. He even talks about that he can feel that there are beings inside, right? That they're almost like telepathically
yeah,
communicating their
yeah,
pain
yeah,
with him,
yeah. That
and
was extraordinary,
um,
wasn't it?
yeah, and so the really odd part, um, not very long after they get there and they're already on site, an army Chinook flies onto the other side of the cliff, and out comes these guys in hazmat suits. And it turns out that they are working with the DOE. And so, they arrest him, and they arrest him, and I assume they arrest the other people who are with him, and are really angry that they're not supposed to be there, and they're cursing at him and threatening them, and
Mm,
even saying maybe we should just throw this guy out of the helicopter,
mm,
and that'll be easier and everything. And so they interrogate him, and basically tell him, read him the right act, tell him, we can we operate, we don't follow the Constitution.
mm,
We go by our own rules. Basically, we can do whatever we want, and basically, don't talk about it or we'll kill you. I mean, that's pretty much
mm,
the
mm,
bottom line. Um,
mm,
and the interesting thing is the temporal. It was not long before DOE was there. Almost like they knew, right?
mm,
They
mm,
were on site almost as immediately as Wygant's team.
mm,
Um, and so there's this kind of open question of, um, you know, how did they know? Like, how did they know that that crash was going to happen, and where they're on site in hazmat suits, like ready to roll, and why DOE? And so there's just a, sort of this open question of, is are they involved not just in luring craft, but also downing craft potentially? And
yeah.
of course, this is around the same time and place as Moment of Contact.
Mm,
The other case that was in Brazil, and so around the same area and around the same year, and so it's in those that case is very similar to this one, because you have another case that is recovered by U.S. forces in a foreign country very quickly after it comes down, and it appears on both cases that there's been some kind of kinetic damage of some
mm,
type
mm,
um, to these craft prior to them, coming down on the ground. So it's just a very those two cases are very similar, and very interesting for a variety of reasons. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of the Weygant case, but then also the
Yeah,
moment of
totally.
contact.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that Virginia case, they
Virginia.
talked about the Virginia, Virginia.
Hmm.
Yeah, they talked about the white smoke coming down. So the
Hmm.
possibility of um, well, it opens up the question of are various craft being targeted,
Hmm.
and then it opens up where how do you differentiate,
Hmm.
like why would you do that, and under what
Yeah.
circumstances would you have to kind of get something out of the air kind of quickly and
Hmm.
deal with the extraordinary chaos of a cleanup operation, even if it's in the middle of you know uh, deepest Peru or whatever. Of
Hmm.
course, you are potentially going to get witnesses and all the rest of it, and Varginha is like a town with lots of people, and so it opens up these. Of course, we don't know the answer to that, but it does make
Hmm.
you wonder, what is going on there. And also, interestingly, with the Legant case, um, he was interrogated in. Am I right in saying that there was a radar station there, and that
Yes.
he was
Yeah.
brought to this radar station, and that's where he
Yeah.
was kind of like really like thinking, why are there people from China working in this Peruvian like radar station where the US military has been asked to stop drugs going over the borders. It's like it didn't really make sense for him why certain kind of person like international personnel had all gathered at this at this radar station, but the kind of story of like why they were there was to stop kind of drug trafficking. So there's
Yeah.
and of course the deep mystery, and we see this, time and time again, is the kind of immediate response of a special team of individuals who are much like that the kind of Zodiac group. What's that thing
Hmm.
as Sedge Masters? Remember
Yeah.
that?
Hmm. Very
These
relevant.
exactly, yeah. These guys turn up, they do the job, they like, huff and puff and they get the hell out of there type thing.
Hmm.
And it really does make you wonder, what is going on. Um, but connected to the radar, then we've got the Guy Hottle memo from the 50s, yeah.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this is a really interesting, it was a memo written to Hoover back in 1950. And essentially, it said that he had been told that there were three recovered craft. Is that right? And
Yeah.
was it? I can't quite remember the actual, the wording that Hottle uses, but essentially that they were kind of suspecting that radar had some kind of influence in them crash landing.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So he says, I've got the quote here.
Uh-huh.
He says, according to my informant, the saucers were found in New Mexico due to the fact that the government has a very high powered radar set up in that area. And it is believed the radar interferes with the controlling mechanisms of the saucers.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes you wonder, like, again, uh, what is an accident? What is controlled?
Mm-hmm.
This question, then you talk about so there's various in this area of kind of capture and baiting
Mm-hmm.
and attracting UAPs. You talk about radar, you talk about anti-neutrinos, and you talk about 3 gigahertz. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything more you want to say about radar before I kind of go on?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think just sort of dovetailing off your point there, I think that my speculation is that the early crashes were not intentional. They were not bringing down craft. I don't believe they were bringing down craft in the 1930s and 1940s.
Mhm.
Um, I think that it was probably more of like an accident where something happens and you're like, whoa, what is this, and how did this happen, and then maybe you're able to reverse engineer that process and find out, oh, maybe it is that we can use this radar system, or maybe we can use this to bring these down.
Yeah.
And so I think that probably that might have happened with radar, with that specifically that 3 gigahertz radar frequency that was being used for radar bomb scoring at the time in those areas. And the reason why that 3 gigahertz number is so important is because there was a really famous UFO case
Mm.
in the 1950s that was investigated by James McDonald. And basically, this case is sort of similar, it seems like, to the Tic Tac case we're finding out, because you have a craft that is being followed by, or at least is operating in the area of uh, a plane that has electronic countermeasures on it. And so it is able to basically pick up radio signatures and emissions and things like that that are being emitted by the craft. And there was a 3 gigahertz signature associated with this craft that the people who picked it up thought was very, very similar to ground-based radars that they were familiar with at the time. And in fact, at first they thought maybe it was a ground-based radar, but the problem is that whenever the craft would move away, the frequency would move away, and whenever the craft would come closer, the frequency would come closer. So they were able to determine that it was correlated with the craft. And so there, just sort of based on that, there's some speculation. If you combine that with the Hoddle memo, kind of putting two and two together, that if you have this emission, right, these craft that emit 3 gigahertz frequencies, and then you also have powerful ground-based radars, used at that time and in those places for radar bomb scoring activities, emitting the same frequency. And then you also have Hoddle that's just saying, hey, it's possible that these radar interfered with the craft. And the reason why that 3 gigahertz thing came up too is because it shows up in Oak Shannon's notes that they were talking about that at the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group meetings in 1985. And then in not the most recent report that we got, but the UAPTF report that we got in, I think it was 2021, they also report that in some of their most interesting cases that there were radio frequencies picked up associated with these craft. And there's actually been someone who was on the Hawkeye, Hughes, PJ Hughes, who's been talking about that as much as he can, without getting into hot water from NDAs and stuff like that. Who's been who was there at the time, who's been sort of not talking about the specifics of the frequency, but at least saying yes, they picked up radio frequencies associated with the craft too.
So that was the Nimitz case,
with the Tic Tac. That's the Nimitz incident. And so there's some of these things that start back, in the 50s, or they start back in the 40s, and that connect all the way up to where we are today. Now, am I saying that the Tic Tac was emitting 3 gigahertz, frequencies? Probably not. But it's just the idea that, that you could pick up these sort of frequencies associated with a craft. Now 3 gigahertz is not a I believe that's X-band radar, and so it's used a lot of in meteorology. That's usually an X-band radar. However, there is, I believe, there is the Carrier Strike Group has a system that utilizes the 3 gigahertz radar system as well. And I think it's part of the. Oh shoot, I'm blanking here. What is it called? I'll pull it up in a minute, but like they use 3 gigahertz radar, today, and it's ubiquitous. It's all over the place now. But in 1947, it's possible that it wasn't. And so some people, when they hear that, they like, oh, so you're gonna tell me there's this really super advanced craft that can't even handle radar? Well, I mean, before that era, right, before the World War II and kind of the post-war era, like how much radar did they really have to contend with? I think we've kind of got this idea in our heads that basically alien technology, if that is in fact what we're talking about here, that it just doesn't change, that it's just static. And so, unless we see something with Tic Tac like abilities in 1940s, then then it's all for naught. And so I think that it's possible that they change their technology, and maybe they change their technology when they have to and when they need to
Yeah,
in
in
order to keep up with
response.
us. I
Totally,
mean,
yeah.
I don't see why it wasn't an issue before, right? The cavemen and the didn't have radar, so they didn't have to worry about it. But once they now have to contend with all of these um, frequencies being blasted into the airwaves, well, now then yes, they have to come up with new ways to do what they do and to stay safe. I mean, we have to do that, right? There's a
Of
there
course,
we
yeah.
have there are people who that's their whole job, is to make sure that this new piece of equipment is going to work in conjunction with all of these others based on what it emits, and that everything's going to be okay, so that you and I can get on board an airplane and know that the Wi-Fi is not going to take us
Yeah.
out.
Immediately open the doors.
Yeah,
Um, and those bouncy slides get popped out.
that's right. That's right.
Um, always looks fun though, like if I was in a plane crash, at least I think every cloud has a silver lining. At least I can go down the bouncy slide, you know?
That's true. Yeah, if you're going to go, if you know the plane is going down, I say pop those hatches open and let's just have fun with it. Like, why are we going
Exactly.
to wait for the fireball at the end? I mean, I'm sure that's not
Absolutely.
where your head is at. Maybe the G's keep you in your seat and you can't get out. But yeah, it would
Maybe.
be nice to have that choice. Like, hey, the plane is about to go down in a in a fireball. Would you like to jump out of the plane instead and have fun for the last,
It'd be
10
wicked,
minutes of your
man.
life?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it'd be pretty
I'd,
cool.
I'd definitely do that. Now,
Yeah.
antineutrinos now, antineutrinos.
Hmm.
You contain, or sorry, include in loose threads this extraordinary worldwide antineutrino map, which I
Hmm.
want to talk a little bit about. First of all, though, um, an antineutrino is basically a kind of the negative of a neutrino, yeah. So it gets
Yes,
popped out when a neutrino gets popped out, an antineutrino gets popped out as well. Okay, and it
correct.
has very little mass, and it can essentially kind of go through anything. Is that essentially what a antineutrino is, Doctor?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That from my very limited understanding, yes,
Doctor of
that is what
Physics.
it is. Yes, Doctor Physics.
It is. Okay, that's good. So um a couple of like you write about this in loose threads, and essentially there's this idea that a way of detecting UAPs. Now, obviously interrupt me if I get this wrong, but a way of
Hmm.
detecting UAPs is to search for high amounts of antineutrinos. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, is it the case? So this is I've got a couple of questions about this. Okay. Is it the case that say like a nuclear um like say like a nuclear power station as an example, yeah,
Hmm.
would that have lots of antineutrinos or like in it or around it or whatever?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so any other kind of like military nuclear connected base or site would also have lots of antineutrinos around it.
Yes. Yeah. That map that's there, it gives you the kind of worldwide view, but it's not probably granular enough to really
Yeah.
see. It's enough to see like where there are nuclear facilities and things like that.
Great
That
swathes of yeah,
right.
like yeah, exactly. But it's not like Google Maps, is it? It's not like street to
No,
street.
I wish that would be
Yeah.
amazing. And if they come out with that, I will buy a subscription.
Yeah. Okay, so now here's my next question about this. Say there's a UAP like in my garden, okay, which
Hmm.
don't think there is, but say there was. Would there be
Okay.
lots of antineutrinos around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that initially that is kind of like the speculation that perhaps the antineutrinos are related to, um, that they're some sort of a byproduct of the propulsion system.
Yeah.
That we're looking at craft using some sort of fusion technology, and even with fusion, there are ways to catalyze fusion reactions using antineutrinos. And so it's possible that we're seeing sort of the remnants of the exhaust, if you will. And it's like the exhaust hangs around for a while. It doesn't just dissipate immediately into the atmosphere. And so if you are seeing a place, especially out in the middle of the ocean or someplace that's really remote, where there's a high concentration of antineutrinos, or in your garden, for instance, and you
Yeah.
know that there's not, some sort of uranium mine, underneath your veg patch, I guess,
Yeah.
then like, hey, what's going on here? Like, what is that doing there? And so the way that the people who've talked about this is almost as like a fishing metaphor, that if you're going to look for UFOs, you should look in places where they're probably going to be. So like a honey hole or a hot spot, and that antineutrinos are sort of a way, are sort of a way to find that. And so if you, for instance, let's just say hypothetically, out in the middle of the Atlantic, there's some spot, some area, let's say it's a mile wide, where you see this consistent antineutrino, signature. And so your first thing is to say, okay, well, let's go and check there, make sure that there aren't any nuclear assets over there that we don't know about, right? So is there a sub that's hidden that maybe is it, emitting antineutrinos? No, there's not. Okay, well, is there a discarded nuclear weapon somehow that is, resting on the bottom, or is there, how is this happening? And if you can't come up with a reason, well, maybe there's some other reason for that, for that hotspot to be there. One thing that I think is really interesting that I've come across recently is Joe McMoneagle. He's a remote viewer,
Mm.
and a very famous remote viewer 001. And he's someone that we write about in Loose Threads because he was a UFO experiencer.
Yeah.
And he's been studied in some UFO experiencer studies. In his book, Mind Trek, and this is an early book about remote viewing, he writes about being targeted to nuclear, to actually, the first one he talks about is being targeted to view the Trinity explosion. So the first testing of nuclear weapons at the Trinity site, and he's there at the site. And as soon as the explosion happens, right, his consciousness is like snapped. He calls it a snap to uh, um, a location that's further away, so that he can see the explosion, and he's not able to go further, almost as if it wasn't allowed, right? Like he wasn't allowed to look. And he talks about this snap happening more than once, and even in like nuclear facilities, where he's clearly looking at fuel rods, that are, I guess, doing their fuel rod thing, and he gets snapped, almost like whatever is happening there is, he's being protected from it. Like it's almost like even just your consciousness, if that is what's happening during remote viewing, that your consciousness is traveling right to another place in time and space,
Mm-hmm.
it's dangerous, right? However, that being said, he also says that nuclear explosions and nuclear facilities and high energy, those things are really, really good targets for remote viewing.
Mm.
That he was especially gifted at viewing those, but that they are also just more generally very easy to view.
Mm.
And he likens this because this has something to do with there being a lot of information basically happening at the same point. So you have a lot of that high energy basically equals high information, talking about like information theory, right? Where there are all
Mm.
of these things that are happening at once. And because of that, it just is like a beacon for a remote viewer.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
bringing all this home, the reason why I went on that aside is because I do wonder if the same thing that makes it a really interesting target for a remote viewer also makes it an interesting target for UFOs. And
Mm.
so maybe the neutrino thing, it could be associated with the craft and with the propulsion system, and I think it probably still is. But there's also the possibility that maybe the antineutrinos are what are bringing are making that area light up for the others themselves, for
Yeah.
NHI to say, hey, this is
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
interesting. I'm going to go here. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
almost like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
something they have to think about. It's just like, it's this some sort of automated response system, almost like an AI, that just, when something like that happens, this high information event, right? It just like, they get snapped and they just appear on site. And so it may look like, well, that, this is coming from the craft, but in reality, it's really coming because, well, there, for whatever reason, maybe there is a nuclear sub, or there's something that's emitting all of this, these neutrinos and antineutrinos, and they suddenly appear, because it's this, they're drawn into the information, if you will.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. That's something that I came across recently. It's a very old book, Mind Trek is, but it's got a lot of really interesting stuff, especially knowing that Joe McMoneagle was, involved in, the experiencer study that Dr. Kit Green, he's one of his
Yeah.
earlier
Yeah. Yeah.
patients
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms
Yeah.
of like collecting his information. And so, yeah, it's just all weaves. It's really crazy how something like that can weave into current day. Lou Elizondo's, I don't think he said anything about antineutrinos, but he has said that basically, if you can find one thing, then you can find them, right? You only need to track one thing. And there's been
Yeah.
some speculation that perhaps that one thing is antineutrinos.
Right. Okay. So yeah. Yeah. So you covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
First of all, the experiences. I've got a list of them. Okay, so we'll talk about them in a minute. But
Okay.
also the other thing about the antineutrinos is, now I wonder, because this is it's absolutely amazing what you said there,
Mhm.
and I totally agree. But I wonder, imagine if you just kind of flip the situation. Okay,
Mhm.
imagine from a non-human intelligence point of view that we are there. I mean, you could argue against this. You could just go with it, for a
Mhm.
few moments, will you? Indulge an old man. We are there, shadow biosphere, okay? And the what one of the few things that pierce through is high amounts of antineutrinos around nuclear sites, and
Mhm.
like nuclear power stations and things. And of course, the other thing that pierces through are experiences and people that have access to the field, as it's known
Mhm.
these days. So how about that? That's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
No,
think I've cracked it. Okay, everyone, you can go home. I've done it.
we've all solved UFOs.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good. I think that's I'm open to that. I think that's a good possibility as well. The other thing is that you could almost combine that and say that, the snap, maybe what's dangerous to us is also dangerous to them too.
Yeah.
What's dangerous to our consciousness might be dangerous to them as well, even with their advanced technology. And so that high information, event that draws them in, might be drawing them in because they're like, hey, this is a problem for us. It's a
Well,
problem for you too, but it's a problem for us.
totally. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
I really like what you're doing there though with the shadow biosphere, and us kind of being on the opposite spectrum there. I think that's really an interesting place to go with it, and thinking of ourselves as, the others, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to call myself another because I'm such
Oh
a
yeah,
big
there you
Lost
go.
fan. Do you remember Lost? Do
Oh
you ever
yeah,
watch
love it.
Lost?
Love it. I
Yeah.
even love the ending. That's the most controversial thing I'll say.
Oh
I
mate,
love the ending of Lost.
I totally loved the ending. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
But what about the epilogue? Did you see the epilogue with what's
Uh,
his name in the
I don't think so.
factory? Oh, have you never seen that? With
Maybe I might not have.
who's the guy with the little glasses? The main one of the main characters, the funny fellow with the little glasses who first comes
Oh,
down in the hot air balloon.
yeah.
Do you remember? He's
I
like the leader of the lot of the others. It got so long ago.
I don't remember.
The
I don't remember
actor's
his name,
name
but
is
I
Michael.
know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
Ben, of course,
Ben. There you
Ben.
go.
How
Yeah.
can we forget Ben? Ben, they did this epilogue after, like, I think maybe a year after or whatever, the show ended, and it's basically Ben in a factory where, like, that group that ran the island. I can't remember what they were called now. Began with
The
K, I
Dharma
think.
Initiative.
Oh yeah, that's not K, is it? It's D. The Dharma
Yeah.
Initiative. Yeah. So they had the job of like labeling all of the cans that were then airdropped, to the island like once
Oh
a
yeah,
year or
yeah.
whatever. And Ben gave them their P45s or whatever, which is their unemployment papers in
Mhm.
Britain. Something like that. Anyways, probably not worth seeing. But anyway, Lost is fantastic. And moving on, moving on from that. I was wondering, oh, there's another thing, just by the way. Is it true that Christopher Nolan, because he's making this Oppenheimer, is it true that he had to be spoken out as like kind of talked down from creating an actual nuclear explosion for the film? Is that
Oh,
true?
I haven't heard that.
I think we should
No,
start that rumor right now because he's like,
yeah.
he loves to do things like in camera and he's famous for that, isn't he? I can just imagine that a producer would have to say, "Sorry, Chris, you're important to us, but you can't actually do a nuclear explosion." So anyway, so that's neutrinos. I think we've sorted that out, anti-neutrinos. Now, one thing that's really interesting, you've just mentioned this actually, is that so there's this um the experiences and this question of um what is it that is about particular people? Why do particular people attract paranormal phenomena? Okay, like the question is, do they? And if they do, what is it about them? And in terms of remote viewers, um, it was looked into, wasn't it? Like Kit Green looked into
Hmm.
it. Okay, I've got this little quote here actually from Loose Threads. So this is Chris Green. This is Christopher Green, who's kind of commonly known as
Hmm.
Kit Green talking. Dr. Kit Green. He talks about some of the experiments with Uri Geller, Pat Price's experiments. These remote viewers were not average human beings. They were much smarter than the average human being. I looked at their blood tests, their genetic tests, their IQ tests, their neurological tests, and their cardiovascular tests, which has a lot to do with endocrinology, which I'm not sure what that is. Is that to do with the
It's to do with the white blood cells
right?
and
Okay.
like the endocrine system. Yeah.
Yep. I concluded that these people are abnormal. In Green's assessment, that was an indicator of why they were so good at remote viewing. So there's something about these folk, their kind of biology essentially, which means that
Hmm.
they're excellent at remote viewing. Okay, and then linking that on to the work that has been done, the blood collected from some key people in the kind of world of experiences, Chris Bledsoe, Whitley Strieber, one of the
John
people from
Burroughs.
John Burroughs, yeah, from Rendlesham. Dr. Eric Davis, in that amazing interview
Hmm.
with Alessandro, he talks about how he gave his blood, wasn't he? And he was like
Hmm.
the Skinwalker Ranch time that he spent at that ranch. It seems like he was attracting some unusual phenomena. Jim
Hmm.
Semivan, and is it true that the remote viewer that you were just talking about is included in this group as well? Is that yeah,
Yeah, Joe McMoneagle. Yep.
McMonagall. Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that and like maybe what is going on there basically? Like what is the research taking place as far as you know or think in terms
Sure.
of kind of understanding the ways that these experiences like their biology.
Sure. So the first thing to understand is that this has been an open question for a very long time. And even dating back into the 1970s, this is something that, excuse me, that Jacques Vallée was brought into SRI for the remote viewing program. He was brought into as a consultant to kind of look at this issue, to look at the UFO connection between the remote viewers, their best remote viewers, and UFO experiences. And so, my guess would be that it probably wasn't just one person that had those UFO experiences. And
Mm.
so this is something that, and we know that like there are very mainstream or very well known remote viewers who were also UFO experiencers. And so it's always this sort of is it the chicken or the egg kind of
Mm.
thing that's going on, but that association between those, that correlation between the two, has been studied for a very long time by the CIA. Dr. Kit Green at the time was a CIA contract monitor. He left eventually. I think it was in '85. He left and went private, but he was still affiliated with the CIA, and I think probably has been for for a very long time. And this is something where they're looking at this from the perspective of, yes, let's look at your blood. There's been a lot of talk about that you mentioned the endocrine system, about the immune system as sort of a recording device, right, for trauma in the body, but possibly even having its own brain, if you will, or its own ability to to kind of track and basically have this internal system. And so I'm not sure if that's related to the endocrine system itself, if it's related to anomalous experiences, but it's more just a reporting mechanism, maybe like a way that they can extract information about the phenomenon from the physical bodies of experiencers of anomalous phenomena. And so they take blood. I think that there's something probably related to DNA that they've been looking at to figure out what's the relationship between particular markers and UFO experiencers. But I think it probably also really branches into paranormal phenomena and paranormal experiences. One of the things that the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, there were handouts that were provided by researcher Melinda Leslie from Jack Houck, who is a big member of the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group. And one of the action items was to develop reliable paranormal performance, high-tech, reliable paranormal performance. And so I think that is something that they are still working on. And I think that is something that is, has been a long-standing goal. And paranormal performance, you could classify that in a lot of different ways, right? Like, I think that remote viewing is a very practical paranormal performance. Imagine that you could take a pill or do a particular protocol that takes 20 minutes, or perhaps do some combination of there might be some biofeedback, you might have some stimulation of the brain in certain areas, but imagine that you could reliably get into a remote viewing state. That it wasn't something that was like, well, I wonder if he's on or off today, but like, if we do these things, even if it takes 30 minutes in the right combination, we know that we can put you into the perfect state of consciousness for remote viewing. That would be a pretty incredibly, that's like the holy grail of an intelligence tool. And so I think that it starts there. I also think that there's, baiting UFOs, getting UFOs to come in. Is that a paranormal performance? I think that if you could reliably, if you could put someone into the perfect state of mind, and it might be the state of mind very close to a remote viewing state of mind, that state of consciousness, if you could reliably get someone in a space that turns them into, like the lighthouse, right? Lighthouses in the dark, if you will, to borrow a term from my co-author Hermes, then would that be something that you want to do? Well, yeah, if you want to know about UFOs and you have a reliable way to bring them in, maybe you can communicate with them. That's something that we explored as well, is the communication aspect of remote viewing. There are certain forms of remote viewing, like CE5 and HICE, contact protocols that are a different form of remote viewing. In fact, we referenced Dr. Stephen Greer has talked about them as remote vectoring and remote viewing, right? That there's RV2 was kind of his alternate way of calling his CE5. But then there's other stuff too, like one of the big things that the Monroe Institute looked at, Robert Monroe, was out of body experiences. I have 3 books on my bookshelf, and they're almost all of them are about journeys out of the body. And the Monroe Institute was actually Albert Stubblebine and John Alexander were working with on behalf of the Army, were working with the Monroe Institute for a period of time, trying to develop these protocols so they can turn any average soldier into a remote viewer.
Yeah.
And that is something that it seems that Dr. Kit Green, who was again working for the CIA at the time, was kind of working to stifle. That he did not want them to take the every person can be a remote viewer path. He wanted everybody to be very focused on, we need to figure out who are the rock star remote viewers, what's special and unique about them, and let's pour all of our money into that rather than trying to like develop a protocol. But I think that is something that's still happening. There's the work of Dr. Colm Kelleher, who is, we mentioned a little bit as well, who's has worked with Bob Bigelow for a very long time with Bass and with NIDS. I'm sorry, with NIDS and then with OSAT Bass. And he's an immunologist, right? And he's talked about something called the hitchhiker effect, which basically when you experience a weird thing or anomalous phenomena, often that can almost act as like a viral. You could almost model the spread of it using virology to see how it spreads, to people that you come into contact with and who they come into contact with. And so, we know that, Dr. Kelleher and Dr. Kit Green are, also working with now Dr. Gary Nolan. And so, there have been some things, some buzz lately. He's denied it, which I understand if he has, and maybe we should take that at face value. But that he's working to develop some sort of way to turn on and turn off whatever it is that causes anomalous experiences, some sort of a drug. And I do know that he has speculatively talked about that, in other interviews, but he also denied that he's currently like that they're working on that. But if he's not working on it, I'm almost certain that there are other people who are. That high tech, reliable paranormal performance, that is a, that's like a holy grail capability. And they know that these things exist. Now they just need to be able to have a better control over them. And it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if they've already developed all that stuff. And now maybe what they're trying to do is to make it more efficient, make it more compact. Maybe instead of having, 5 things attached to you, you only need 1 thing attached to you. Maybe you just need to take one drug, and that will get you there. But that's a, you asked me earlier, things that people should focus on in loose threads. I think that's a really big piece. That reliable paranormal, reliable high tech paranormal performance. And I think that's still something that's very much. I think that it might be one of the reasons for the experiencer study. Not just because these are people who, for whatever reason, are able to get into these states of consciousness, where they experience these anomalous experiences and vector in whatever it is looking for beings that can, for humans that can see them and interact with them. They're able to get there quicker. Another big piece to that is near-death experiences. And Joe McMoneagle had near-death experience. That's what sort of launched his sort of weird aspect of his whole life. Bob Monroe, also same thing. He's talked about how he said that whenever he was created, they must have left the last peg out, because he was able to just kind of slip out of his body really quickly and get into that state of consciousness very easily. And so that really brings John Alexander's focus into it as well, because he has a PhD in the study of death, thanatology, and he actually would not have met Bob Bigelow if it were not for him giving. I believe that Bigelow was at a talk of his that was about near-death experiences. That if there's one thing that Colonel Alexander is maybe more interested in near-death experiences than he is UFO experiences. And even in other interviews that he's given, there was an interview that we were listening to for doing Loose Threads research with Bob McGuire, and he wanted to know about Bob McGuire's near-death experience. And at first we thought he was asking him about his NDA, but he was asking him about his NDE. And so I think that all of those things, these altered states of consciousness, because I believe that's what they are.
Mm,
I think that being able to reliably get to those places, to turn those off, to turn them on, is really key. And so I encourage everybody to not look at one as main or primary and the others as sideshow or something,
mm,
but that they're
mm.
all very intimately related.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what J. Christopher King always says.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But to quote J. Christopher King, absolutely. But I absolutely agree with you because I get really frustrated about you talk about the compartmentalization of UAP research. What about our silos? We silo the research so much. Not you, and I don't do any
Mm-hmm.
research, but the kind of UAP world. And I'm fascinated by NDEs as an example. I'm really, really fascinated by remote viewing, and the connections between these things are, I mean, essentially, there are multiple ways of accessing the field, and some ways
Mm-hmm.
are, easier than others. And I'm a big fan of the OA. Do you know the OA? Have you ever seen the OA? It's a television
No,
show,
the show. I
Netflix
haven't
show.
seen it.
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
but
Okay.
I know
Well,
what you're talking
oh,
about.
okay. Spoiler alert. Anyway, it's very good. Um, moving on, moving on. I'm reviewing it in a few weeks. But you're absolutely right that the interconnectedness of this. I think that is one of the things. If I was to say, let's look into this, it's to really start to draw comparisons between the experiences that different people have under different kind of ways of accessing this field. And going on to that, then it's just reminded me about the Rendlesham guy and John Burroughs. He was advised to do a very particular kind of yoga and meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say something quickly about that, please?
Yeah. So basically, John Burroughs, yes, he was one of the main people involved with the Rendlesham Forest case, which I'm sure your listeners are really familiar with. Um, but he was contacted um, by Hal Puthoff and by Kit Green, and he was actually taken to Earth Tech, and he was basically instructed that to try a couple of different things. So to practice Kripalu yoga and Vipassana meditation. And Vipassana meditation is, I think, a lot of people will be familiar with that. But Kripalu yoga is just a form of yoga, and he was basically just told like, "Hey, you need to do this," and he never got any kind of an answer on why he needed to do that. He just needed to work on it. That's what they told him.
Mhm.
And so, it's one where then later on he is, taken out to the desert and basically does a contact, kind of like a CE5 type of um, uh, activity where they're trying to bring in craft and see if his presence brings them in, and he
Mm,
doesn't even do. He ends up not even doing the meditation beforehand, but they still
mm,
have success. And the person that he's with tells him, "I'm surprised you're not already on the inside of the government working on this." Because there is all this person was apparently aware of or affiliated with, this study that's being done, and it's probably in relation to DARPA, right? John Alexander has talked about. There have been he has and other well he hasn't, but other people have talked about that he has taken samples and videos and things of their testimony and taken
mm,
them back to DARPA. But in this case, everybody was involved in getting John Burroughs to give his um, to give his DNA and to,
mm,
kind of cooperate with this effort, including, I mean, all the people we've been talking about. John Alexander, it was involved. You have Kit Green was involved. Gary Nolan was flown down on an airplane to go and try and convince him to do this. And the reason he eventually caved and did it is because Kit Green kind of pulled some strings and got him some help from the VA that he was not able to get because his medical records were classified.
uh-huh.
Um, and so he's one of the only people who In fact, Kate Green made this post that we talked about in Loose Threads as well, on the Above Top Secret forum at one point, saying that it was one of the only people that he can like that his medical records were classified that like that never happens, and that he should have been able to get access to them, and he wasn't. And that there are probably still parts of his medical records that are still classified. So, so yeah, there's this this connection apparently between these types of contemplative practices,
Mm.
um, and getting into the proper headspace for contact work. And
Yeah.
that makes sense to me from a standpoint of when you meditate, when you do these kinds of things, you are changing your brain's physiology,
Mm.
over time, and little by little, you're changing. The more you do it over the span of your life, it actually literally changes the physiology of your brain. And so, new connections are made, old connections are severed, and it's possible that in doing this, maybe your brain becomes a better interface for consciousness or particular states of consciousness that are harder to access otherwise. Um,
Mm.
and so that doing and practicing these things, there was a study that we linked to, that talks about some of that stuff as well. There's also a book that I would recommend for people who are interested in how those um, practices can change your brain, and it's called Altered Traits. And it's all research. It's basically a big literature review about all of these, different, um, all of these different types of meditation and
Mm-hmm.
the impact it has on your body and on your brain, and on your way of being in the world. So, but yeah, that was a very interesting tidbit that Burroughs kind of gave there with those specifics about those types of practices for contact work.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I'm at the moment I'm reading this book by this remote viewer based in Britain, Daz Smith. The book is called Surfing the Psychic Internet, and it's about how he was part of this medium circle when he was much younger, and it's just this extraordinary, absolutely, literally out of this world adventures that he had. But he then came to and settled on remote viewing because all that was he described that as chaotic, yeah, and kind of too chaotic for him. But with remote
Yeah.
viewing, there's a control essentially. He's a lot more in control with it, um, which is really interesting. And I've just found that book, by the way, that you mentioned. So I'll put a link to that in the episode description. Um, so one other thing, just before we kind of wrap up here, because thank you so much for being so generous with your time, Daniel. I really appreciate it. And like I said before, like I said before, I wasn't joking. We could kind of talk about it for ages, but let's just wrap up slowly wrap up here because I still have got a massive
Mhm.
list of questions. But one thing that I've noticing in Loose Threads, and maybe you can kind of elaborate, maybe with your own kind of understanding and kind of research experience, like sites of interest, places where you keep on seeing stuff happen. You spoke early on about White Sands, the White Sands area, and that kind of general
Mhm.
area. There's lots and lots of fascinating things happening from a UAP perspective. And then of
Mhm.
course we've got Catalina Island of California.
Mhm.
And then so those two, and maybe are there any others that you want to kind of like zoom in on as like as places where these are the hot spots, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, we also have, um, off the East Coast as well. There appears to be a hot spot, kind of in the area of, sort of where, kind of the Northeast. There seems to be some spots, and I think there are lots. I think really, there's a lot of water. A lot of hot spots over water, at least that's what we're getting reports from. Maybe recently because of
Yeah,
the Navy becoming so open on this, so that could play a factor as well. Also, another one, Skinwalker Ranch. That's another
yeah.
very very popular, kind of place for all kinds of anomalous things to happen.
Yeah. And when you kind of what couple of months, like 2, 3 months since you released it, when you look back,
Mm-hmm.
if you're thinking about the response and feedback that you've had, and
Mm-hmm.
also your ongoing kind of collection of materials,
Mm-hmm.
how's it been basically? What has the response been in the last couple
Yeah,
of months?
it's been honestly overwhelmingly positive. At first I was very nervous about, going on and doing interviews and showing my face and, putting my name out there, just because, frankly, I just know how the UFO community can be not very not a very kind space, especially when, people are out there, making bold claims, and I do feel like we kind of succeeded in that. I don't believe we really made any bold claims. We just let the sources speak for themselves and said, "Hey, here you go. Here's what it says." So we
Yeah.
tried really to make very few claims, and I think that was a good idea. Because then, if someone wants to argue, they're not arguing with me; they're arguing with like the source or the person who said
Totally,
it.
yeah.
But yeah, it's been really overwhelming, man. I've really been encouraged to see people read it and really get excited about it. And then also to start doing their own research. And I see people
Mm,
posting all the time about, oh, this is a loose thread and that's a loose thread. That's awesome. Like
mm,
that's why we did it. We did it really for researchers and for people who wanted to go deep into this topic. Um,
mm.
and we did. There was a lot of things that we left that we didn't talk about. There were things that we left a lot of meat on the bone. Some of those things we did because we were lazy, and we didn't want to we didn't want to extend it by another third. Sometimes we did it because we just said, this is something we should let other people, chase down and look into.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mentioned earlier about Forbidden Science Volume 5 coming out. There's just so much. There's so much meat on the bone there. So much left to dig into. But yeah, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I couldn't have honestly. I don't think I could have asked for a better response than what we got. I mean, you're never going to get 100%, but if you get like 80% in the UFO community, you are doing really well.
Yeah,
And I feel like we're
absolutely.
getting pretty close to that. Because we're a really rough crowd, like a really rough crowd. And I own that. I say we, not it's not they. We are a really tough crowd to please. And so anyway, I was very excited to be a part of it, and my co-author and I, forged a really good bond and relationship through doing that too, and that's been fun as well because he's, I don't know if you chat with him or not, but he's just a wealth of information, and so working together with him was really fun, and but yeah, I think we're both very pleased with what's happened.
Yeah, well, it is absolutely fantastic, and it's filled with so much information, and we've spoken about some of it, but there's still so much that is in there. And also, one other thing is that the hyperlinks are all over the document, aren't they? So
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things to chase down if you're kind of want to do it. And one thing as well, talking about UFO researchers, if you're interested in chasing down the Legant story, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely extraordinary. Not just the testimony that he gives to Stephen Greer that you link to, but also those names, and just that it'd be interesting to see kind of like what happened to him. But essentially,
Yeah.
I'm just interested to know that because
He
it's
still
such an
exists. He's out there. You can find him. I mean, people have found him.
okay,
I don't think he hasn't recanted his story. I
yeah,
don't think he really wants to talk about it anymore. But he's out there. So he's someone that if I were, someone like a congressional staffer, and I'm looking for people to bring in and question,
yeah,
and Wagan, if you're out there, sorry, buddy, but I think you would make a great witness, to tell, even if it's just behind closed doors, what he experienced, and not do it for for Stephen Greer, but to do it for the United States Congress, I think would be,
totally,
a really good step. And so, yeah, there are people 1000% that are like, all of these little things that are digging into those things. And even prior to us writing Loose Threads, there are people who have done some serious digging in that case, and everything comes up legit. Like there's nothing, he is who he says he is. He was where he said he was. The other names check
Yeah.
out that he provides. He has not recanted. He's not enthused if people are trying to contact him and talk about it. He does want to talk about it, which I think actually adds credibility. That he's not looking for fame or notoriety. And yeah, so that is a very interesting aspect and angle to chase down for sure.
Yep. And loose threads too, maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe one day. I think it's one where it's so hard, and I think I've even heard maybe Ross Coulthart talking about how it's so hard to write a book, or to write something and publish it, like it's not just a blog, but like something more substantial. When there's just stuff like information flying out like a water hose, just blasting you in the face constantly, and that's sort of where we're at right now, where there's so much coming out that if we were to publish something today, it would be completely irrelevant 2 days from now. And so I think we found a pretty good sweet spot. And for this first one, and if there's to be a second one, I don't know that there's going to be, but it's certainly something we're open to. It's something where I think we'll probably wait a little bit and just kind of see where everything takes us. And who knows, maybe we'll get disclosure and then we can basically write a book and have Loose Threads be the first part. And then this will be part one. And then part two is basically how present day, really getting into the nitty gritty of how we got to where we're getting, because I think it's important. I think it's important to know what the history is. If this all comes out, and I suspect that it will sooner rather than later, maybe not all of it, but at least broad swaths. People are going to want to know what the heck, like where did this all come from? I thought this was all completely ridiculous nonsense. And it turns out that there's this huge lineage that's been going on since, the 40s. How do we get from point A to point B? And so anyway, hopefully that's the short answer. Hopefully we will do a Loose Threads part two, maybe.
Yeah, but it's written in such a engaging conversational style, which is, it's brilliant. It's like, obviously there's lots and lots of information in there, but it's very human and very kind of conversational as well. And I imagine that you'll be writing on Medium, when you kind of have something to write about, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's one where, yeah, I think if we do something again, it will probably be a book. We probably won't do a PDF again. Although I did like doing the PDF because of the links, being able to do that. But it's possible we can release some sort of an ebook or something that's linked up, because I do think that the links, having that is a really cool addition that you don't get. You can get it all in appendices, but that can be I think it's really interesting to have it interactive. We're just going, I want to watch a video, or that's one of the reasons why we had such a great to basically, again, not make any claims that we weren't backing up with evidence. If you want to know where the evidence is, it's literally linked right there. You could just click it and say, oh, that's where that comes from. So
sorry to interrupt, but your audio just kind of froze. I missed the last 30 seconds or so, Dan. Sorry. Is it okay if you just or maybe I'll just edit around that? Okay. Or do you want to just say that? Or I think it's,
I was saying
hold on a sec, it's still happening. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It might be back now. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I was just saying that I think one of the reasons that we were so successful, that we got such a good reception with Loose Threads, was because we did it as a PDF with links, so that if someone wanted to know where we were pulling a quote from or where we were pulling that, they could go straight away to it. Yeah. And that's just something that a little bit harder to do in a book format or in a different format. But it was too long for a blog, right? Like you're
Totally, yeah.
there was medium blog. We talked about doing that. It would have been like an infinite scroll.
Yeah.
But right now we're just kind of sitting back like everyone else and watching. I mean, we're not sitting back. We're collecting information and just kind of watching and listening and waiting to see what's going to happen next. You know, and I hope that we have a lot more to write about in the coming, you know, in the near future.
Yeah. One last thing, it reminded me of Jeffrey Mishlov's award-winning essay with the, you know, the videos of New Thinking Aloud, you know, which
For
is
Bix.
just brilliant. Yeah, for Bix, exactly. Yeah, which was just brilliant, you know, to be able to kind of dive into it, you know. Listen, Daniel, thank you ever so much. I really appreciate your time, and it's been wonderful to meet you and to have this conversation. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely, and so I really appreciate you spending some time with me talking about Loose Threads. Congratulations! It's a brilliant piece of work, and I look forward to reading your, you
Thank
know,
you so
work
much.
for years to come.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully we can do this again.